Good evening from the News Radio 1120 and 93.7 FM KPNW studios. I am Jorge, also known as Bill Lundun. I do the wake-up call 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Monday through Fridays here on KPNW, streaming worldwide at kpnw.com. And if you want to hear crazy Oregon news every day of the week, I do it every morning in the 6, 7, and 8 o'clock hours here on KPNW. And our crazy Oregon news brought to you by Sean Sutherland. Who is Sean Sutherland? Well, he's kind of Mr. Answer. He owns Ask Insurance. And if you have questions, you need to call Sean. Now, we're going through re-enrollment period right now. People are looking at their Medicare and what am I going to do? And there have been changes and you're like, and well, Sean can actually help you out, because that's what he does. So if you're looking at health insurance or homeowners insurance, the man has answers and the man can help you out and hopefully save you some money and make things a little bit more clear. And that's always a good thing, unless you're one of those folks that just likes to walk around in a fog. All right. Here's your crazy Oregon news. We'll start off with this, and this is a follow-up on a story that we have been covering for quite a while, and it has to do with Asian families being targeted for burglaries here in the state of Oregon. Well, we now know that a Colombian national, Dorinson Martinez Grandas, has been charged in a burglary ring that targeted Asian business owners not only in Oregon and Eugene, but also up in Washington. According to the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Oregon, Martinez Grandas and 6 others from Colombia are accused of conspiracy to transmit stolen property. Now, the group allegedly used advanced techniques like signal jammers and perimeter counter surveillance to carry out their crimes. They broke into homes by shattering glass doors. They reportedly stole cash, jewelry, designer handbags, purses, wallets, travel documents, and other valuables. In a couple of cases, even safes. Now, authorities say the crew first burglarized a home in Auburn, Washington in October of this year, followed by homes in Salem and then Eugene. Detectives from the Eugene Police Department started surveillance after noting the group's movements between the Eugene and Salem incidents. They executed a search warrant at the group's Eugene rental, and investigators found stolen property, digital devices, and evidence of money transfers, all going to Colombia. All 7 individuals were eventually detained after fleeing into a nearby wooded area. U.S. Attorney for Oregon, Scott Bradford, said this multi-state operation deliberately targeted hardworking families. Meanwhile, Lane County District Attorney Chris Perosa says the DA's office is solely interested in seeing these individuals being held to account for the victimization of community members. He further said that we appreciate the efforts of the U.S. Attorney's Office in helping local law enforcement achieve that end. The case is being investigated by the FBI, local police departments, and the prosecution is being led by Assistant U.S. Attorney William McLaren. Well, after an uproar during a number of ICE busts throughout the local area last week, the city of Eugene's independent police auditor says they received a number of complaints from members of the Eugene community, all claiming the Eugene Police Department was present and aided ICE immigration enforcement activities on November 5th. Police auditor Craig Renetsky says he and his team conducted a thorough and complete investigation into the matter. As part of that investigation, the independent police auditor's office reached out to individuals who were witnesses to the incidents. They also reviewed dispatch records, viewed the location of all EPD vehicles at the time, listened to police radio communications, and examined pictures and videos of the incident. And the conclusion? Yeah, Eugene police weren't there and they didn't help. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek finally, quietly signed her transportation bill to fund the Oregon Department of Transportation after it passed in an emergency special session in September. And opponents are ready to fight it. Senate Minority Leader Bruce Starr says the governor waited to sign the bill for a reason. He says, quote, clearly she would prefer that voters don't weigh in. She doesn't want to give Oregon voters the opportunity, so she delayed, and here we are. Now, the law raises the gas tax, greatly increases all sorts of vehicle fees, and doubles the payroll tax to fund buses. A signature gathering campaign is ready to ramp up and get underway with already over 25 volunteers standing by to hit the streets. Now, if that petition signature is successful, those taxes would be put on hold until the question goes to voters next November. Opponents of the governor's $4.3 billion funding bill say that the legislature could actually fix this perceived funding problem by giving the Oregon Department of Transportation flexibility within its budget so they can move money from places that aren't important to places that are. Opponents have until December 30th to collect over 78,000 signatures, and the expectation is they're going to be able to hit the streets this coming Friday to gather the signatures. First, the Secretary of State has to review and approve referendum forms, and then they can go out and start gathering signatures. Well, Oregon has a new ranking. We're close to last. We're close to last. It's ranked as being one of the worst states to find a job in 2025. A study by Personal Finance Wallet Hub determined the best and worst states for jobs in the U.S. The study used 34 different key indicators to find which states had the best and worst job market strength and economic health. Indicators were based on a number of factors like states' employment growth, median annual income, starting wages, even down to average commute times. Each indicator was given weighted points, with more heavy weight given to factors that influenced a person's decision to relocate for employment. So here's why Oregon was named as one of the worst states for jobs this year. Oregon was ranked the 46th best state, which is a nice way of saying fifth worst state for jobs among the 50 states. According to the report, Oregon had an above-average commute time, ranking as the number 15th best state, but was below the average for job security, ranking 29th. Oregon ranked lower for employment growth, median annual income, and unemployment rates. It's also among the top 10 worst states for job opportunities and monthly average starting salary. Additionally, Oregon was ranked as the number one worst state for economic environment. So, in case you're wondering, well, who's worse than Oregon? Well, that would be Alaska, Kentucky, Louisiana, with West Virginia being the absolute worst. But we've got a legislative session coming up in a few months here, and doggone it, we're on our way to number one. So the free spending days that followed the pandemic are over. Oregonian spending grew by just 5.1% last year. That, according to recently published data from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. That's down sharply from 2021, when consumer spending grew by 13%. And that, of course, was because of federal stimulus payments that loosened up the purse strings during the COVID pandemic. Consumer spending in Oregon, for the most part over the last few years, tracked national spending, but according to the federal data, Oregon's spending fell quite a bit more steeply last year. Heading into the holiday shopping season, an annual survey of household spending plans by consumer research firm Circana shows that shoppers expect to spend about 3% more this season than last. Most of them are saying that's because they expect prices to be higher. The consulting firm that used to be known as PricewaterhouseCoopers, now just PwC, writes in their annual holiday sales forecast that they predict actually a 5% drop in holiday spending. That's the first significant drop since the first pandemic year of 2020. So Oregon's Universal Health Plan Governance Board met reviewing the draft status report, which the board has to provide the legislature coming up during legislative days in December. Now, this is to essentially be a single-payer system, or if you will, socialized medicine, where the state, hypothetically, pays for everybody's insurance. Well, not necessarily the state. So in considering how that they would actually pay for this and their revenue-generating mechanisms, the board is considering much higher new personal income taxes for Oregonians, higher corporate income taxes, corporate activities taxes, aka CAT taxes, and payroll taxes. So the goal, Medicaid for all in the state of Oregon. All right, we're going to talk about schools and schools in Oregon. Now, we have followed this and have told you over the weeks and months about different school districts in Oregon and how they are on the precipice of running out of money. Well, locally, the Eugene 4J School Board approved a resolution authorizing its superintendent, Miriam Mickelson, to prepare a proposed budget. This would affect the 2026 through 27 school year, and the expectation is they're going to be reducing the district's workforce and programs. Now, as far as what that is going to mean district-wide, well, Mickelson has to return to the board with recommendations on the number of positions to be cut and the programs to be cut over the next 3 months. Decisions for what specifics will then be made to the board. The board will give its approval, and then they'll move forward. These reductions are going to take effect in July of next year. Last month, Mickelson announced the reduction of 4 assistant superintendent positions, merging into 1 executive position. According to the district, the budget shortfall 4J is looking at right now represents 11% of their operating budget, or about $30 million. And it's the result of increasing personnel costs, the end of pandemic funding, and declining enrollment all across Lane County. Now, also nearby, the Bethel School District is facing a budget shortfall, and that school board voted Monday to close Shasta Middle School. The intention is to close the school at the end of this school year and try to help fill a $2 million budget deficit. And the causes, familiar: skyrocketing personnel costs, plummeting enrollment, pandemic funding going away. And while the districts complain that state funding isn't, well, meeting their needs and needs to greatly increase, according to the numbers, funding in Oregon is doing just fine. But, of course, your teachers' unions and school districts won't admit it. So let's get into the numbers. According to the Education Data Initiative, which tracks education funding nationally and by state, Oregon's K-12 schools rank 15th in spending nationally and 19th in funding. Oregon actually spends more on public post-secondary education than most other states. So the way that funding works for schools in Oregon, when a kid enrolls in a particular school district, a pot of money follows that kid into the school district. And as if that kid, for instance, ends up being homeschooled, that pot of money goes away. Or if the kid goes to, let's say, a private school, the money goes away. Or let's say the family moves out of state, the kid all of a sudden now shows up in Idaho. Well, that money, that pot of money goes with the kid. And how much is that pot of money? K through 12 schools essentially receive $19,376 a year per pupil for a total of about $11.2 billion annually. So Oregon K through 12 schools receive about $1.6 billion or 2011 bucks per pupil from the federal government. State funding totals $5.63 billion or about $9,748 a pupil. Then you have what's called local funding. Now this is what people end up paying out of their property taxes. That totals $3.87 billion or about $6,697 per pupil. Now, again, this is all per year per student. So the biggest drivers are most schools have recently gone through union negotiations in the last couple of years, and they gave very generous increases to staffers. It's also followed by precipitously declining enrollments. Like I said, each kid who's home taught, attends a private school or online school, takes $19,376 literally out of the kitty. So, for instance, in a single school district, a decline of 100 students is nearly $2 million a year in losses, whereas has been the case in some larger school districts where they've seen declines of 1,000 students leaving the district over the course of a year. Okay, now you're dealing with some really big money, $20 million a year. And then you have, well, the elephant in the room, and that's PERS, the Public Employees Retirement System. Now, districts pay in to fund teachers' retirement benefits. So let's break this down. So PERS increases over the next biennium are expected statewide among school districts to total $500 million. That is 2026 and 2027. $500 million. Now, mind you, I said that's increases. And had it not been for Senate Bill 849, passed in the last legislative session, the increase in PERS payments would have been $670 million. But that number, like I said, is simply how much the increase is going to be, not how much PERS in full actually costs. Now, those numbers vary somewhat by district, but in 2024, despite savings, the cost remains significant. Now, the reports are that the average school district rate that they're paying into PERS for their teachers and other workers increased to 27.3% of their total payroll. And that will be for the upcoming biennium, 2025 through 27. So putting that in even more blunt terms, more than a quarter of the money that taxpayers dump into education in Oregon goes into teacher retirement every year. All right, your Crazy Oregon News brought to you by Sean Sutherland of Ask Insurance. You have questions, you know who you need to ask. Ask Sean at Ask Insurance. Okay, with that, Rick, it is time for you to roll out the reel.